I never thought my own blood would betray me the second I stepped away from the house. So I staged a business trip and hid on my own land to see what my sons would do when they thought I was gone. But nothing prepared me for what I witnessed through the cracked window of my old barn that night. Hit subscribe if you believe life always finds a way to balance the scales. Because this story proves it. I never thought I'd reach a point in my life where I felt the need to spy on my own children. I always believed in trust, in the simple notion that blood ties meant loyalty. But that morning, as I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, I realized I couldn't take the chance anymore. Something had shifted in my sons, something subtle yet unmistakable. I'd overheard Derek talking on the phone late last week, his words dripping with ambition and greed. "Dad won't be around forever," he had said, almost laughing, almost as if the idea of losing me was an opportunity rather than a tragedy. My stomach had churned, and for days I tried to ignore it, tried to chalk it up to paranoia, but deep down, I knew I had to test them. I decided I would stage a business trip, something that would take me out of sight for 3 days, enough time to observe, to see who my sons really were when I wasn't hovering over them. I had spent my life raising Derek, Ryan, and Luke with values I thought they absorbed naturally: respect, loyalty, hard work, love for this land that had been in our family for generations. But recently, I'd started noticing cracks in the foundation. Derek, the eldest, had grown impatient with the slow pace of farm life, constantly reminding me that the land was just an asset, and that I should consider selling it. Ryan, in his usual careless way, treated this place as a playground, leaving trash in the yard, letting the animals wander, and speaking about the house as if it were already his. And Luke, the youngest, well, Luke rarely made a fuss, rarely spoke, but he also rarely stood up. He worked 2 jobs and kept his head down, the quiet son who always seemed invisible. I loved them all, but I had to know the truth. I began planning my trip meticulously. I told Derek and Ryan I was heading to Dallas for a few days to meet an old client who had promised a lucrative deal. Luke, as usual, asked if he could help with anything before I left, and I smiled at him, ruffling his hair. "You've got everything under control, son," I told him, not entirely sure if that was true. I kissed their foreheads, waved goodbye, and drove off in the car they assumed would take me hundreds of miles away. But instead of leaving town, I parked my old pickup behind the barn, hidden beneath the shade of the oak trees, binoculars resting on my lap. I wanted to see them without them seeing me, to watch their faces, their actions, their true colors. At first, they waved at the empty road, smiles stretched across their faces, a performance of politeness. But within minutes, the mask started slipping. Derek glanced around, making sure the coast was clear, and immediately pulled out his phone. Ryan wandered toward the garage, lazily dragging a box behind him, and muttered about calling some friends over. My heart sank, yet I stayed put, gripping the binoculars like a lifeline. I felt a strange mixture of anger, sadness, and anticipation. This wasn't just about me leaving for a few days. This was about everything I'd worked for, everything I'd believed in, and whether it mattered to the people I loved most. Derek dialed quickly, whispering as he spoke. I couldn't catch every word, but the tone was unmistakable. Excited, almost conspiratorial. My stomach turned as I realized he was calling a realtor, probably discussing selling the land behind my back. I had built this farm from scratch with my father, and before him, generations had cared for this soil. I had never imagined I'd have to hide in my own backyard to protect it from my sons. Ryan, meanwhile, had wandered back to the house, phone in hand, sending texts and laughing with a reckless glee that only he could muster. It was the same recklessness that had left me patching fences and fixing broken gates while they enjoyed themselves. And now, here they were, flaunting it. I watched, frozen in disbelief, as Derek and Ryan began rifling through drawers, opening cupboards, and moving boxes around as if the house belonged to them. I had kept some old letters, documents, and my late wife's belongings locked in the shed. Things I never wanted them to touch. I had trusted them not because I doubted them, but because I thought respect was in their nature. Apparently I had been wrong. They found the key to the shed, and I could see the gleam of excitement in their eyes, the thrill of power in discovering secrets that weren't theirs. It was one thing to test them, another entirely to see that they would treat our family history like a casual treasure hunt. All the while, Luke was coming home from his morning shift. He carried groceries, tired but steady, and immediately noticed something was off. The air around the house felt different, charged. He looked at Derek and Ryan with a questioning gaze, but they ignored him, caught up in their scheming. Luke didn't complain. He didn't argue. He simply began tidying up, putting things back in order, feeding the animals, and checking the locks on the barn and sheds. I watched him, a lump forming in my throat. He was quiet, yes, but he cared. He cared enough to do the work they treated as trivial. He cared enough to uphold the standards I had always tried to teach, even when they didn't. It was strange, seeing my sons so blatantly divided. Derek and Ryan had their eyes on profit and fun. Luke had his eyes on duty and honor. It pained me to watch the conflict silently grow between them. I had always hoped that love alone would guide them, that our shared history would keep them on a righteous path. But love, it seemed, was not enough to restrain greed. My fingers ached from clutching the binoculars so tightly. I wanted to jump out, to yell, to demand respect, but I reminded myself of why I was doing this. I had to see everything for myself, unfiltered, unmasked. Hours passed, and the house began to take on an almost surreal atmosphere. Derek and Ryan had invited some friends over, people I barely knew, and they paraded through the rooms like conquerors. I could hear laughter, loud and careless, the kind that made my skin crawl. They opened bottles, threw wrappers on the floor, and even attempted to move some of my mother's antique furniture. Each moment felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I knew my sons could be reckless, but this level of disregard, this lack of shame, was something I hadn't anticipated. I had spent decades building not just a home, but a legacy, and it was being dismantled piece by piece in my absence. Luke didn't engage with any of them. He moved quietly through the chaos, correcting their mistakes where he could, muttering under his breath, and sometimes stopping to stare at Derek and Ryan with an intensity that made me hold my breath. It was as if he could feel their betrayal before they even acted. I realized then that Luke's quietness was not a lack of presence, but a presence that observed, that weighed, that cared. I felt a surge of pride and fear at the same time. My test was revealing truths I had long suspected, but never fully known. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the property, the tension thickened. Derek and Ryan were plotting something, their whispered schemes audible even from my hiding spot. I couldn't discern the exact details, but I knew it involved the sale of the land and exclusion of Luke. My hands trembled as I scribbled notes in my journal, documenting every word, every action. I realized that in these few hours, I was seeing my children for who they truly were, not who I had hoped them to be. And yet, amid the disappointment and anger, I also saw hope in Luke's steadfast presence. He had not betrayed me. He had not betrayed the legacy. And in a way, that was more powerful than anything Derek or Ryan could ever do. Night approached, and the house fell into a temporary calm. Derek and Ryan were upstairs, probably making more calls, planning the next move. Luke was tending to the animals, speaking softly to them, as if they could understand the gravity of the situation. I watched him from my hidden perch, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that one of my sons had the heart to honor our family, sorrow that the others had already chosen a different path. I realized that by hiding and watching, I had become more than a father. I had become a witness to the choices my sons would make in my absence. As I leaned back in my seat, exhausted and emotionally drained, I made a silent promise to myself. This test would end soon, but its lessons would not. I would confront them, yes, but only after I had seen everything, understood everything. The betrayal, the loyalty, the greed, the love. It was all laid bare before me now, and I was determined to act wisely. I had always feared losing my sons to time, to ambition, to their own selfishness. Now I realized that the fear was valid, but it was not the end. There was still a chance to preserve what mattered, to reward what was worthy, and to confront what could no longer be ignored. I stayed awake that night, watching the house from the shadows, listening to the quiet footsteps of Luke as he finished his chores, noting the absent movements of Derek and Ryan, and mentally preparing myself for the confrontation that would come in the days ahead. I knew that what I had started could not be undone, and yet I felt a strange calm. For the first time in a long while, I saw clarity. I saw the true faces of my sons, and I knew that whatever came next, I would not be blinded by hope or fear. I would act with the knowledge of what I had witnessed, and as the moon cast its pale light over the fields and the barn, I realized that this test, however painful, was necessary. It was the only way to see who among my sons was truly worthy of carrying forward the legacy of our family. I stayed hidden in the shadows of the barn, heart hammering, as the first few hours of my absence gave way to more unsettling revelations. Derek's whispers were deliberate, his words calculated, and I could hear the excitement in his tone as he spoke into his phone. He was negotiating something. I could feel it, something that had nothing to do with family, with legacy, or with respect. I had built this farm with my father and my mother before me. Every fence post, every plowed field, every board of this house carried the weight of generations. And here was my oldest son, treating it like it was just another business deal, like it was nothing more than a cash transaction. My hands tightened around the binoculars, knuckles whitening. I could almost taste the betrayal in the air. Ryan, ever the sidekick, was no better. He had a smirk plastered across his face as he waved some friends in from the driveway. Loud laughter soon filled the house, echoing through the walls I had once built with care and love. They moved through my home as if it belonged to them, opening drawers, rifling through cupboards, tossing aside papers and old letters. I could hear them snickering as they found photographs of my wife and me in our younger days, and I felt a sharp pang of sorrow. Those memories were sacred, not for mockery or entertainment. I wanted to storm out, to yell, to demand respect, but I forced myself to stay put. My plan was working. I was seeing the truth, even if it was hard to bear. And then Luke appeared. Quiet, tired from his shift, carrying bags of groceries in his arms. He stopped for a moment at the edge of the chaos, his brow furrowed as he scanned the room, taking in the disorder, the laughter, the disrespect. Derek and Ryan ignored him, too absorbed in their own schemes. Luke didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't try to compete. He simply set the groceries down, rolled up his sleeves, and began putting things back in order. He swept the floor, wiped down counters, fed the animals, and even took a moment to repair a broken latch on the barn. Watching him, I felt a swell of pride and relief. This son, the one I had often overlooked, the quiet one who rarely spoke up, was showing the character I had hoped for in all my children. He cared. He cared about the land, about the family, about the legacy I had fought to preserve. Derek, noticing Luke's diligence, gave him a mocking glance. "What are you doing, little brother? Trying to play hero again," he sneered. Ryan laughed, adding, "Yeah? Like that's going to save the farm from being sold." I clenched my jaw. Their words were cruel, but I could also see the tension building in Luke. Something inside him shifted, a determination I hadn't seen before. He didn't respond verbally. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than their taunts ever could. He moved with quiet purpose, ensuring the animals were fed, the doors were locked, and the house was at least somewhat in order. I could feel my heart beating faster, as I realized that in these first few hours, the division among my sons had become painfully clear. Two driven by greed and selfishness, one guided by loyalty and integrity. As the day wore on, Derek and Ryan's schemes became bolder. I watched as Derek pulled out a folder of documents, likely detailing property values, zoning, and potential sale prices. He spoke in hushed tones to the realtor he had called earlier, outlining plans to sell parts of the land while I was supposedly away. Ryan, meanwhile, took pictures of the house, laughing as if documenting a conquest rather than the home of our family. Every move they made, every careless word, cut through me like a blade. I could feel anger rising, a hot, furious energy I struggled to contain. But I reminded myself to stay calm, to continue observing, to let the truth reveal itself fully. That was the purpose of this test, to see who my sons truly were when the facade of obedience and respect fell away. Luke, sensing that something was amiss, paused in his chores and began listening. I could see the furrow in his brow, the slight narrowing of his eyes as he tried to discern what Derek and Ryan were up to. He didn't approach them directly at first. Instead, he continued his work with quiet efficiency, maintaining the integrity of the farm, the house, and even the family's honor. I realized then that Luke was more perceptive than I had given him credit for. He was aware of the undercurrent of betrayal, the plotting that had begun the moment I left. And while Derek and Ryan were caught up in their greed, Luke was preparing, in his own understated way, to confront it. By mid-afternoon, the situation escalated. Derek and Ryan had grown careless, emboldened by the absence of oversight. They found the key to my locked shed, the place where I kept personal items, family heirlooms, and letters from my late wife. My stomach dropped as I realized what was about to happen. They approached the shed with the same sense of entitlement I had witnessed in the kitchen. Pushing the door open and stepping inside, I could hear them laughing as they rifled through boxes, pulling out old documents, photographs, and keepsakes. They treated it like a scavenger hunt, not realizing the weight of what they were handling. The letters from their mother, the personal diaries, the plans for the farm, all sacred, all private, were now in the hands of the two sons I feared the most. Luke noticed the intrusion immediately. His eyes widened as he saw Derek and Ryan pawing through the shed. He didn't hesitate. He strode over, a quiet but firm resolve in his stance, and said, "Stop, put that back." Derek scoffed, waving him off. "Mind your own business, Luke. It's just stuff. Nothing that matters." Ryan laughed, backing his brother up. "Yeah, why are you always so serious?" "Relax." I held my breath, gripping the binoculars. This was the moment that would reveal his true character. Luke didn't argue or retreat. He simply stood his ground, ensuring that they couldn't completely violate the privacy and history of our family. It was subtle, restrained, and yet immensely powerful. The confrontation in the shed lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours to me. Luke spoke calmly but firmly, his words carrying the weight of responsibility and respect. Derek and Ryan laughed, tried to intimidate him, even made sarcastic threats about his lack of authority. But Luke didn't flinch. He knew what was right, and he acted accordingly. I felt a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride that one of my sons had integrity. Sorrow that the others had strayed so far from the values I had tried to instill. This was more than a family conflict. It was a revelation of character, of choices made in moments of temptation, and I was witnessing it all from the shadows. As evening approached, the house settled into a temporary calm, though the tension lingered. Derek and Ryan retreated to the living room, whispering about plans for the next day, plotting how they could further their schemes. Luke, meanwhile, continued his work outside, repairing fences, tending to the animals, and ensuring the property was secure. I realized that in his quiet way, he was the protector I had hoped for. The realization was bittersweet. I had always worried that my children might one day betray the values I held dear. Now I knew that while some had, others had not. The truth was laid bare before me, in all its complexity and contradiction. That night, I watched as Luke carried on his chores, working in the fading light of dusk. The shadows of the house seemed longer, darker, filled with the weight of what had transpired. I thought about my wife, about the legacy we had built together, and about the choices my sons were making. Derek and Ryan, intoxicated by greed and ambition, were blind to the moral consequences of their actions. Luke, steady and careful, was aware, vigilant, and loyal. I felt a deep sense of relief that at least one of my sons could be trusted to carry forward what we had built, even if the others could not. Yet I also felt the heavy burden of disappointment, the knowledge that familial bonds were fragile, and that trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. I stayed awake long into the night, hidden behind the barn, listening to the quiet movements of Luke as he finished feeding the animals and secured the doors. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sounds of laughter and whispers from the house, reminders of the betrayal that had occurred. I reflected on the day's events, on the choices made by each of my sons, and on the lessons I had learned. I realized that this test, painful as it was, had given me clarity. I knew who among my children could be trusted, who had the strength of character to respect our family's legacy, and who would need guidance, or perhaps discipline, to understand the weight of their actions. As the moon rose high above the fields, casting a pale glow over the barn and the house, I made a silent promise to myself. The test was far from over. There were still more revelations to come, more confrontations to endure, and more decisions to make. But I also knew that I had already witnessed the most crucial truths: the loyalty of Luke, the ambition of Derek, and the carelessness of Ryan. These truths would guide my actions in the coming days, shaping the confrontations and resolutions that lay ahead. And as I settled in for a restless night in the shadows, I felt a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I could see clearly, and I was ready to act on the knowledge I had gained. The night was heavy and quiet, the kind of silence that presses on your chest until you feel it in your bones. I stayed hidden in the shadows, gripping the binoculars and watching the house from behind the barn. Derek and Ryan had settled into the living room hours ago, whispering plans that I couldn't fully catch, but the tone alone told me everything I needed to know. They were plotting, scheming, and completely unbothered by the fact that I could see them. Their faces were relaxed, unguarded, as if the world belonged to them alone, and my stomach twisted with a mixture of rage and disappointment. I had always known they had ambition, but ambition without respect, without loyalty, was dangerous, and now I was witnessing it in full. Meanwhile, Luke moved quietly outside, tending to the animals and repairing broken fences by the pale light of the moon. He worked deliberately, carefully, and even bruised from earlier tasks, his hands steady and strong. Watching him, I felt a surge of pride I could hardly contain. This son, the one so often overlooked, had shown more courage and integrity in a few hours than Derek and Ryan had in their entire lives. And yet, the situation was far from resolved. Derek and Ryan were still in the house, still scheming, and I knew they would eventually attempt something even bolder. I had expected small betrayals, perhaps some disrespect, but I wasn't prepared for the audacity with which they moved. Derek suddenly grabbed a set of old family papers and began flipping through them, speaking quietly but in a tone that carried his confidence and entitlement. Ryan laughed and nudged him, pointing at documents I recognized as my mother's old letters, the personal ones I had hidden away for years. I felt a lump in my throat as they handled these letters with such disregard, and I fought the urge to storm inside and reclaim them. But I reminded myself of the purpose of my test. I had to see the truth fully, even if it broke my heart. Luke noticed immediately. He stopped his chores and walked toward the shed, his expression a mixture of frustration and determination. He didn't yell, he didn't scream, he didn't beg. He simply stood there, watching Derek and Ryan with a sharp focus that made my chest tighten. "You shouldn't be doing that," he said quietly, but firmly. Derek smirked, looking him up and down. "And what are you going to do about it, little brother?" Ryan chuckled behind him, adding, "Yeah, like you're going to stop us." Luke didn't back down. He stepped closer to the shed, making sure they couldn't take anything without his notice. I could see the tension in the air, the unspoken conflict, the clash of values. This wasn't just about property or money. It was about respect, about family, about the legacy we had fought to protect. Luke understood this instinctively, and it was clear in every line of his posture, every glance he threw their way. He wasn't trying to win a battle. He was defending something far more important: our family, our history, our integrity. The argument escalated quietly, almost like a storm brewing beneath the calm surface of the night. Derek, frustrated at being challenged, raised his voice, mocking Luke. "You think this changes anything? You think you can protect Dad's silly rules?" Ryan joined in, laughing and throwing a box onto the ground. "Yeah, it's just stuff. Let it go, hero." I felt anger rising in me like wildfire, my knuckles whitening as I gripped the binoculars. I wanted to step in, to shout, to make them understand the gravity of their actions. But I held back, watching, knowing that the truth needed to reveal itself fully, unaltered by my presence. Luke, however, didn't waver. He didn't flinch. He simply moved with purpose, carefully collecting the scattered papers, setting them back into the boxes, and locking the shed doors. His eyes met mine, though he couldn't see me, and I felt a silent communication pass between us. He knew I was watching, even if he didn't fully comprehend the extent of my plan. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Luke's courage wasn't loud or boastful. It was quiet, steadfast, and unwavering. It was the kind of courage that would endure long after the chaos faded. Hours passed, and the house settled into a tense calm, though the tension never fully lifted. Derek and Ryan retreated to the living room, still whispering and plotting, while Luke continued his chores outside, ensuring the animals were fed, the fences repaired, and the property secure. I couldn't help but reflect on the stark contrast between my sons. The eldest two, driven by greed and self-interest, and the youngest, guided by duty and integrity. It was a painful realization, but one I had to face. I had raised them all with love, but love alone was not enough to shape character. Actions, choices, and principles mattered far more, and I was seeing that clearly now. Late into the night, as the moon cast long shadows across the fields, I followed Luke silently from a distance. He moved with purpose, checking the barns, securing the gates, and whispering softly to the animals as if they could understand him. I watched him pause near a small wooden cross I had built for my wife, kneeling and speaking quietly, though I couldn't hear his words. His devotion to family, to the land, and to the memory of those who came before him was palpable. I realized then that he carried more than just his own sense of responsibility. He carried the weight of our entire legacy on his shoulders. Meanwhile, Derek and Ryan had grown reckless. I could hear them shouting now, their whispers replaced by louder arguments as they debated how to proceed with selling parts of the land. They were oblivious to everything else, consumed by their own plans and greed. It pained me to see them like this, so blinded by ambition that they couldn't see the damage they were causing, not just to the property, but to the family itself. I realized that this test was doing more than revealing character. It was exposing the consequences of choices made without conscience or consideration. Luke, ever vigilant, returned to the shed, checking to make sure nothing had been tampered with again. He had noticed every move, anticipated their intentions, and acted to protect what mattered most. I felt a swell of pride mixed with relief and sorrow. Relief that one of my sons had the integrity to act rightly. Sorrow that the others had strayed so far from the values I had instilled. It was a harsh lesson, but one that had to be seen fully. And as I watched Luke work quietly, I understood something crucial sometimes. The strongest people are the ones who act without recognition, without applause, without expectation of reward. The night deepened, and the wind carried faint sounds from the house. Laughter, whispers, and the occasional crash of something being moved or broken. Derek and Ryan were still plotting, still scheming, still unaware of the consequences that awaited them. I felt a tight knot of anxiety in my stomach. I knew this test was far from over, that the coming hours would reveal even more of their true nature. But I also knew that Luke, in his quiet strength and steadfast character, was the one who would ultimately uphold the family, the land, and our legacy. As dawn approached, the first light of morning began to creep across the fields, painting the property in pale gold. Luke was still at work, repairing fences, feeding the animals, and ensuring that the house and barns were secure. He moved with a sense of purpose, his actions deliberate and careful, the weight of responsibility evident in every gesture. I realized that in his quiet way, he was the protector of everything I held dear, and in that moment, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The test I had begun, painful as it was, had revealed truths I could not ignore. Derek and Ryan had shown their true colors, driven by greed and ambition, while Luke had demonstrated loyalty, courage, and a deep understanding of what truly mattered. I sat in the shadows, exhausted and emotionally drained, reflecting on the events of the night. I knew that the confrontation with my sons was approaching, that the moment of truth was inevitable, but I also knew that I had the clarity and knowledge to act wisely, to make decisions based on what I had witnessed, rather than on hope, fear, or assumption. The betrayal of Derek and Ryan, the steadfastness of Luke, the moral lessons revealed through their choices. All of it would guide my actions in the coming days. And as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the property and illuminating the house in warm light, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and a deep sense of peace. For the first time, I truly understood the character of my sons. I saw who could be trusted, who had the courage to act rightly, and who had chosen a path of selfishness. And I knew that the decisions I would make, the confrontations I would initiate, and the resolutions I would enforce would all be guided by this truth. The night had revealed more than betrayal and loyalty. It had revealed the soul of my family. And as I sat in the quiet dawn, watching Luke work tirelessly, I made a silent promise to myself. I would act with justice, with wisdom, and with the full understanding of what I had witnessed. The breaking point was approaching, and I was ready. By the time night fell again, The tension around the house had thickened to a nearly unbearable level. Derek and Ryan were no longer whispering their plans. They had become careless, bold, almost brazen in their actions. I could see them moving through the house with the sort of confidence that only comes from feeling untouchable. Derek was on the phone again, pacing back and forth in the living room, speaking in hushed tones, but I could hear enough to know he was negotiating with a neighbor who had long coveted a piece of our land. Ryan laughed and egged him on, bragging about the easy money they would get if they managed to convince the neighbor to make an offer. My hands clenched around the binoculars. I had never felt such a mixture of rage, disbelief, and sorrow. This was more than disrespect now. It was audacity, a complete disregard for family, for history, for the legacy we had all fought to protect. Luke, ever vigilant, noticed the subtle signs of danger immediately. He paused mid-task outside the barn, his eyes narrowing as he saw Derek slipping a set of documents into his jacket, and Ryan gesturing toward the neighbor's house. Luke's instincts had always been sharp, but now they were honed to protect what mattered most. Without hesitation, he moved to intercept the neighbor, who had begun approaching the driveway. The moonlight cast long shadows, and I watched from behind the barn, my heart pounding. Luke's quiet courage contrasted sharply with the recklessness and greed of his brothers. In that moment, I realized that Luke was the only one among my sons who truly understood the weight of our family, the responsibility that came with the land, and the importance of guarding it from harm, both internal and external. The neighbor, a man I had dealt with cautiously over the years, seemed surprised when Luke confronted him. "This is private property," Luke said firmly, his voice calm but unwavering. "You need to leave." Derek, sensing a challenge, stepped forward, waving Luke off. "Relax, Luke. This is just business. You're making a big deal out of nothing." Ryan laughed, adding, "Yeah, don't act like you actually have any authority here." I felt a surge of pride and fear all at once. Pride that Luke was standing firm. Fear of what could happen if Derek and Ryan escalated further. But Luke didn't flinch. He maintained his stance, eyes locked on the neighbor, silently daring him to overstep. I could see the tension in Derek and Ryan's faces, their arrogance wavering slightly for the first time that night. They had underestimated Luke's resolve. I realized then that his strength wasn't loud or confrontational. It was quiet, steady, and powerful. It was the kind of strength that would endure far longer than any momentary display of bravado or greed. Inside the house, Derek and Ryan had grown bolder still. They found more documents, old letters, and even some of my personal items that I had thought were safely hidden. Their laughter echoed through the walls, mocking, careless, utterly disrespectful. I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain hidden. I needed to witness everything, to see the full extent of their choices before intervening. This was not just about property anymore. It was about character integrity, and the very essence of who my sons were. Luke, meanwhile, moved with purpose outside. He repaired broken latches, checked the barn doors, and made sure the animals were secure. He didn't argue or confront his brothers unnecessarily. He simply acted to protect what was vulnerable. His actions were deliberate, thoughtful, and infused with a quiet authority that belied his age. Watching him, I felt a surge of hope amidst the anger and disappointment. He understood the importance of responsibility in a way Derek and Ryan never would. The tension reached a breaking point when Derek discovered the shed key again and decided to break in at 2 a.m. I watched from my hiding spot, breath held, as he and Ryan approached with a crowbar. Their intentions were clear. They wanted access to documents, to letters, to anything they could manipulate for their own gain. The audacity of it stunned me. They were willing to violate the sacred trust of our family, just for a fleeting advantage. My heart raced, and I knew I couldn't remain passive for much longer. Luke, sensing something was about to go terribly wrong, stepped in. "Stop. You're crossing a line," he said, his voice steady but firm. Derek laughed, dismissing him. "What are you going to do, little brother? Call Dad. He's gone." Ryan chuckled behind him, adding, "Yeah, this is just business. Don't take it so seriously." But Luke didn't step back. He blocked the shed doors, eyes flashing, hands steady on the handle. I could see the tension in Derek and Ryan's faces. They were realizing, perhaps too late, that Luke's resolve would not waver. I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety as I watched this confrontation unfold. Luke had always been quiet, often overlooked, but now his presence was commanding, and it was enough to halt the reckless actions of Derek and Ryan. I realized that this was the moment that would define our family, that would reveal the truth of character, loyalty, and integrity. The night air was thick with tension, the kind that presses on you until you feel it in every nerve. I remained hidden, watching, waiting for the outcome of this critical confrontation. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional scuffle or muttered word. Derek and Ryan had grown frustrated, their arrogance tempered by the quiet strength of Luke's resolve. I could see their plotting faltering, their confidence shaken, and I felt a cautious sense of hope. Perhaps the lesson would be learned, perhaps the recklessness would be tempered by the consequences they were beginning to face. Finally, as dawn approached, Derek and Ryan retreated, muttering under their breath, leaving the shed doors secure and the documents untouched. Luke remained outside, his posture relaxed but vigilant, ensuring that nothing had been damaged and that the property was safe. I felt a profound sense of relief and pride. He had faced the recklessness and greed of his brothers and had acted with integrity, courage, and responsibility. It was clear to me now that he was the protector our family needed, the one who would uphold our legacy, even when the others failed. I stayed hidden until the sun rose, watching the first light illuminate the fields and the house. Luke moved methodically, checking fences, feeding the animals, and securing the property. Derek and Ryan were still inside, perhaps realizing, at last, the seriousness of their actions. I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion, relief, and anticipation. The breaking point had been reached, but the ultimate confrontation, the resolution of this test, had yet to come. I knew that in the coming hours, I would have to reveal myself and make the decisions that would determine the future of our family and the land we had worked so hard to preserve. As I watched Luke work quietly in the dawn light, I made a silent promise to myself. This property, this family, and this legacy would not fall into the wrong hands. Derek and Ryan's greed would not prevail, and Luke, steadfast, loyal, and courageous, would be recognized for the son and protector he truly was. The night had revealed the character of each of my sons, and the choices I would make now would reflect that truth. I felt a deep sense of clarity, knowing that justice, guided by the knowledge I had gained, would finally be served. The first rays of dawn stretched across the fields, bathing the property in pale gold light, and I knew it was time. I had watched, waited, and endured the betrayals, the reckless schemes, and the quiet heroism of Luke. Now, there would be no more hiding. I had recorded every word, every action, every betrayal and act of loyalty, and I would confront them with the full truth. The house seemed unnaturally quiet as I approached, my old boots crunching against the gravel driveway, each step echoing with the weight of the decisions I was about to make. Derek and Ryan were still in the living room, sprawled across the furniture, speaking quietly but nervously. I could sense their unease even before they saw me. Luke, of course, was outside, tending to the animals, unaware that the moment of reckoning had arrived. I stepped onto the porch and called out, my voice calm but commanding. Derek. Ryan. Inside. Now. Their heads snapped toward me. Shock and disbelief etched across their faces. Derek's mouth opened, then closed, his eyes narrowing. Dade, you're... How? He stammered. Ryan looked equally stunned, fumbling over words, unsure whether to defend himself or flee. I ignored their questions. I had no need for excuses or lies. I had seen everything, and it was time to confront the truth. I motioned for them to sit, and they reluctantly complied, their confidence replaced by apprehension. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, tapping a few buttons to play the recordings I had made over the past 3 days. Their whispers, their laughter, their schemes. Their words of greed and mockery. Every betrayal played back for them to hear. Derek's jaw tightened as he realized there was no denying what he had done. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his older brother, perhaps hoping for an ally in this moment, but finding none. Do you hear that? I asked, my voice steady but cold. Every word, every action. Every moment you treated this house, this land, and this family like a game. You have shown me who you truly are. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, silencing him. Save your excuses. I don't want to hear them. I have seen enough. At that moment, Luke entered the room, his calm presence contrasting sharply with the tension between the others. He had been working all morning, caring for the animals, securing the property, and maintaining the integrity of our family's home. He looked at Derek and Ryan with a quiet determination, a steady confidence that made them shift uncomfortably in their seats. I gestured toward him. This is the son who has acted with honor, courage, and responsibility while you two pursued greed and recklessness. Derek scoffed, trying to dismiss the moment. It's just a test, Dad. I mean, you could have. I cut him off. No, this is reality. This is who you are without the illusion of my presence. And now, it is time to face the consequences. I reached for the envelope I had prepared, containing my new will. I had spent weeks revising it, considering every action, every betrayal, every moment of loyalty. Derek and Ryan's names had been reduced to a small cash sum, barely enough to satisfy their sense of entitlement. Luke, on the other hand, would inherit the property in full. I began reading aloud, my voice echoing in the quiet house. To my sons, I leave the following. Derek and Ryan, you each receive a modest sum of money. The rest of my estate, including the 40-acre property, the home, and all belongings within, will be entrusted to Luke. He has demonstrated loyalty, responsibility, and respect for this family's legacy. He is worthy of carrying forward what has been built over generations. Derek exploded, shouting, "You can't do this! That's not fair!" Ryan joined in, voice cracking with frustration. "Dad, we helped. We're your sons!" I held up my hand again. Helped. You treated this property as a game, a source of profit, a playground for your ambition. Only Luke has shown the character necessary to honor this land and this family. Luke stepped forward, his eyes calm and steady. Dad, I don't want to take it from them. Maybe we can. I shook my head. No, Luke. This is not about taking. This is about giving to the one who deserves it. This is about protecting what is rightfully ours, what must be preserved for the future. Derek lunged, anger and desperation overtaking him. This is ridiculous! You can't. I stood taller, my voice firm and unwavering. I can, and I have. Every action, every choice, every betrayal has been witnessed. There is no room for argument. The will is final. Ryan, seeing the determination in both me and Luke, slumped in defeat, muttering under his breath, his dreams of easy wealth slipping away. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the heavy breathing of my older sons. I looked at Luke, who met my gaze without fear or hesitation. I felt a surge of pride, gratitude, and relief. This was the son who would carry forward the family legacy, who would honor our history, who would protect what mattered most. Derek and Ryan, despite their fury, could not deny the truth any longer. Days passed, and the tension lingered. Derek and Ryan eventually left the property, anger and resentment simmering beneath their calm exterior. They threatened legal action, claiming unfair treatment. But the documents were clear, the will was lawful, and the truth of their actions undeniable. They had chosen greed over loyalty, ambition over responsibility, and now they faced the consequences of those choices. Luke and I spent the following weeks repairing fences, tending to the fields, and restoring the home to its proper order. There was a quiet satisfaction in the work, a sense of peace that only comes when integrity and justice align. I watched Luke handle challenges, make decisions, and care for the land with a sense of purpose and dedication that filled me with pride. He had proven, through his actions, that he was not only my son, but the protector of everything we had built. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, casting long shadows across the property, I sat on the porch, watching Luke repair the barn roof. He looked up and smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "We'll get it all back in order, Dad," he said quietly. "I'll make sure nothing like this ever happens again." I nodded, a lump in my throat. "I know you will, son. I know you will." It was in that moment I realized the depth of what had been revealed through this painful test. Betrayal, loyalty, greed, and integrity had all been laid bare, and the outcome, though harsh for some, had shown the true character of my children. Derek and Ryan had revealed their priorities, and Luke had revealed his heart. I felt a profound sense of relief and hope. The land, the home, the legacy, all would be in the hands of someone who truly valued it. Weeks later, Derek and Ryan attempted to challenge the will legally, claiming that the test I had conducted was unfair. But the documentation, the recordings, and the clear evidence of their intentions left the courts no room for doubt. Luke was officially recognized as the rightful heir, and the property remained safe under his stewardship. Derek and Ryan left town, embittered and defeated, while Luke and I continued our work together, restoring the land and the home. I often think back to those 3 days, hidden behind the barn, watching my son's true natures reveal themselves. It was painful, yes, but necessary. I had to see the truth with my own eyes, to witness the choices made when the illusion of my presence was removed. And in that clarity, I found hope, pride, and a renewed sense of purpose. Luke had proven himself worthy, not through words, but through actions, courage, and integrity. The farm thrived once again. Fences were repaired, fields were tended, and the house was restored to its rightful order. Luke worked tirelessly, not out of obligation, but out of respect and love for the land and for our family. And I, sitting on the porch each evening, watching him work, felt a deep sense of peace. I had seen the truth, confronted the betrayal, and rewarded the loyalty. The legacy would continue, safeguarded by the son who deserved it most. As the years pass, I know that Derek and Ryan may never fully understand or accept the consequences of their actions, but that is their burden to bear. Luke and I continue to tend the land, honor the memory of those who came before us, and protect what is most important. And each night, as the sun sets over the fields, I am reminded that sometimes the hardest tests reveal the most important truths about character, about family, and about the legacy we choose to preserve.